Alright, so I'm here to present about ActiveResource. An ActiveResource is a library made by David Heinemeier Hansen, or started by him and worked on by other members of the Rails core. And it is their implementation of REST. So does anybody not know what REST is? Okay, I'll just quick say, REST is an alternative to SOAP. It is another, oh, this monitor isn't going off. It is an alternative to SOAP. It's a like a method for, it's basically an API implementation using XML. And so REST tries to use HTTP, the protocol, at the lowest level it can. So for example, I have an app here that's running at a machine at my company remotely. And so, for example, if you were to, it's a way of doing create, read, update, and delete operations on data, just like you might be used to with SOAP. So if I wanted to, say, get a user object from an application that was implementing REST, I might go to a URL like this, and it would have the XML data for a user object, and maybe other objects that it includes within it, maybe not. So this is an example of a user object. So this is using the ActiveResource is two parts, and half of it is currently in Rails. The half that if you're familiar with Rails, you might be used to now typing in map.resources into your controller, and the idea there is that it gives you default routes that are RESTful. So I'll show you an example of a controller in Rails, which is a RESTful controller and implements half of ActiveResource. So in this example, this is a user's controller over a user object, and it has an index action, a follow action, a create action, update action, and destroy. And the actual routes for them are very similar. So if you wanted to delete a user1, the URL for that is still /users/1.xml, but you would not be sending a get operation. You'd be sending a delete, or maybe you're sending a post, but kind of faking a delete. But the idea is that you set by using HTTP, you keep the route simple and you keep the operation simple. And so ActiveResource tries to take this to the extreme and make basically a syntax where you can work with remote objects on a remote service like this one, almost as if they were local to your database, using syntax that they borrow from ActiveRecord, which is Rails library for just going over database models. It's an ORM library. So I want to show you actually how this works in practice. So I have this app is just local. This is just sitting on my machine, and I'll just show you what's involved. This is very close to a plain, just generated right out of the box Rails app. What I've done to it is, as part of the library code, I've added an ActiveResource. So this was actually meant to go into Rails 1.2. Back in the day, it was just considered part of what would happen in Rails 1.2, but it was delayed, and only the server half made it into Rails 1.2. But it's still in Rails trunk. It's still in Subversion. You can still check it out. So that's what I've done here. So I've just included that in the applications library, and I've made a model file for each one. So if I have an ActiveResource user model, it's actually really simple. This is all it is. So if you know you have this service that's implementing ActiveResource RESTfully, like the controller is that I have, just instead of inheriting the user from ActiveRecord base as you're used to, you can inherit it from ActiveResource base, and then just set the basic site prefix that it will use. And it makes all kinds of conventional assumptions about the model. So it assumes that it can make the URL using this prefix and then appending users/1 if you're finding the one object, or finding the user with ID 1. So you don't have to specify any of that yourself. So I'll run this and I'll show how the syntax works, and then I'll go over the controller and the server and talk a bit about how it's actually working. This is running. So I'm opening up a console. So if you're not familiar with Rails and the console, basically it just gives you a command line interface to your application, to its models, to its controllers, and to everything. So I can just make calls here, just inside the environment of my application. So it recognizes the user class, it's in the namespace and everything. So this is my ActiveResource class, and if I use very active record-like syntax here, if I just go user.find1, this will go and it returns a user object, and you have it has its attributes, and it does simple conversions on attributes. It knows that ID is a number, so it's not the string one, it's the number one as an attribute, and you can change it, and you can save it. Oh, and it failed. Oh well. But if it does fail, you can get an errors object, and it'll hopefully tell you why. And not sure it does. It actually has no errors. Let me see here if it actually did it anyway. Well, it didn't. Okay. Well, I'm not sure why that didn't work. I just set the server app up today, but the get part of it is working. And so you just have an object, and so let me look at the controller here. This is what the controller is that we're using, and these are not anything unique to ActiveResource. The stuff that I checked out as a version. This is part of Rails current as it is. So for example, in the show option, I'm finding it by the ID parameter that comes in, just as you'd expect. And in something called the respond to block, which governs if you can request one resource through a variety of formats. So if I were to request just user/1, this by default would go for it would look for like a view like show.rhtml in my views, and that you'd be accustomed to having that there. There's nothing. I don't have anything there, so it's not. If I added a wants.html line here, like it would search for a view and find it. So you have an easy way of discerning what behavior you want to turn, or deciding what behavior you want to have go on, depending on the format. And it judges the format by the suffix that you put on. So just by requesting .xml, it knows that you have .xml. And the routes for this controller are simple. I wasn't raised on a Mac. I apologize. So the controller here is just connecting. Oh, that's why the create wasn't working. So it gives you a controller action ID .format. This is now a default route in Rails as of 1.2, I think. And if I do map.resources here on user, it's the singular version, right? Yeah. This, by putting that in your routes file, that generates routes for each of the 7 actions in your controller. Okay. So let's see. Why don't I just restart this and see if my create works now. It's going off the edge of the screen.
They click it too far. Yeah.
What, is there a clear operation?
You'd have to exit. Control L.
Ah, beautiful. Okay. Okay. And oh well. All right.
Can you do a full messages on there?
Well, the errors don't have a full. I don't think it has a full messages.
Well, the error
Yeah.
the error is 500
Oh,
coming
yeah.
from the server on our office.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe that's something just unique to our office environment. Okay, but you know, say that save operation worked, you would have full access to your data through HTTP. So you don't need to grant a full database access to your client, which wants to use your app. You can just share your data over REST. And now this is just a cookie cutter Rails controller, which is granting full access to every part of the model, including a destroy operation, create an update. But like, you could obviously customize this to be whatever you want. So in fact, I'll give a live example of this. There's a forum that's growing in popularity, the Beast forum, and the guy who made this forum and is a big part of Caboose, Techno Weenie, Rick Olson, is one of the authors of ActiveResource, and to promote this, to promote it, he's actually implemented part of it in Beast. So if you go to user/1, you see the just plain HTML page for Rick's homepage and his beautiful face. And if you just append .xml, then you're treated to an XML representation of his data. So like this is how it actually worked in the wild. Now, and he doesn't have it enabled. You can't delete users off this system, but he's given partial access to it. And you can, if I were to change the site prefix in my model, I could access that. Okay, so for to start, are there any questions? Like I feel like I moved pretty fast. Did I? What do you guys think about ActiveResource?
Are there hooks for encryption?
Sorry?
Encryption.
There's no encryption on this, but there is basic HTTP authentication. So if in the site prefix that I had specified in the model, so if I were to put, say, that would be sufficient to log in with HTTP authentication in this.
Use it over SSL. HTTPS.
Oh, I haven't tested that, but that works.
I don't know.
I'm actually not sure.
I'm sure. I'm almost positive.
You think so? Yeah.
I'm a bit confused here. This user class you had was the one you were loading into your script console, right?
Right.
Okay. Then you were showing some controller code that exists on the server side.
Right. That's from a different.
It's a different user. That's an active record.
Right. That's where the database is located remotely.
Okay.
And the girl is located remotely.
That's why when he changed the routes file, you weren't changing the route file, the right.
Yeah,
routes
I
file.
didn't need to restart my console.
Right, because you were changing the wrong routes file.
Oh, you're right. Of course I was. I confused myself. I changed the routes file in my local app.
So then, as a follow-up question, what is there? I guess it is configurable. How do you go from like an X? So you have all your data and some XML representation, which can be nested all sorts of different ways, and ultimately it goes into a user object on your client side.
Right.
How does that? I'm sure there's somewhere we can map an X path to an attribute or an X path to a sub object. Is there something of?
I'm not sure.
Does that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, except like in the
Is that what's
actual.
going?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I kind of glossed over that. So in the show action here, when it wants XML, when you've requested an XML extension, all it's rendering, it's not rendering from like a view file. It renders an XML, which is just user.toXML.
So I don't know Rails, so that's a standard thing in Rails?
Yes, that's included.
Just maps all those attributes to.
Oh, okay.
Right, and I've told it to include posts. Part of this app is that a user has many posts, and a post belongs to a user. So posts have a user ID attached. Also, I should mention that none of the code here, this code, if you were to open up generate a new Rails app and use the generator to generate a scaffold resource, you would get a controller which looked almost exactly like this. All it would have wants.html lines, which I removed just so it was more compact. But this is the code that is like standard for a resourced object. And you can see one little thing happening here is if you create a user, what you return there is you return headers which point to the location of the new user, so that like if I were to create a user, it would have the ID automatically filled in on return. So you don't lose any power there. So this is really great, and it all acts over HTTP. So actually, now I'll do a little bit of promotion. And in the last few weeks, we've been working on something at ThoughtBot, which ActiveResource is a standard of a protocol. It's like an implementation of REST, and it's not specific to Ruby in the least. Basically, the really important part of ActiveResource, and the thing that I think is so awesome about it, is not how it works in a Rails app specifically, but just how it uses XML in the simplest way possible. And I've worked with a little bit of SOAP before, and getting like the format that SOAP uses and the kind of libraries you have to work with to get SOAP to work, especially in a Ruby environment, is really complicated. And there's nothing complicated about this. And it's very human readable even, and XML so often isn't. So there's nothing, but it's not unique to Ruby. So what we've been working on at ThoughtBot is actually an implementation of this in JavaScript. So you could do all the things that I just showed, but in JavaScript. And let's see, I need that to be available on the screen. There we go. That'll do it. So what I have here is this is an extension called Firebug for Firefox. And what it affords you, among many things, it's an incredible extension. But one of the things it gives you is a JavaScript console, which is a great deal like the console that I was just using for Ruby, which was IRB. And this is plain JavaScript. So if I can just type in any line of JavaScript, and so if I type in plain alert, it will run immediately, and it shows me an alert. So I'm just running live JavaScript here. So this. Right now, our syntax for using ActiveResource with JavaScript. So this is all running on the remote application, and this is using just to show you. It's using a JavaScript file that's located here in the server, and there's nothing. Let's see here. And I'm including 3 JavaScript files. I have prototype, Obstree, which is a DOM parsing engine, and Jester, which is what we titled our library. And so I can, if I tried to keep this as close to ActiveResource as we could. So this is the equivalent of inheriting from ActiveResource base. So I tell it to model a user object, and it makes as many assumptions as it possibly can from the string user. So it names the class, and it assumes the URL and the singular and plural version of the name, but you can override it, of course. And it assumes that the site prefix is that of the current application. So it assumes the prefix is office.thoughtlab.com, and this makes a special sense because JavaScript can't contact other domains and inside the browser. So once I have this, I can do the exact same line that I used before, and you can see it called a get to that URL, and it constructed an object on it, and it has the same attributes, and it does the same translation of integer to an actual integer. Incidentally, that you can the magic is right there because it tells you types right inside the XML, and you can use that to parse it into the correct type. So my point here is that ActiveResource is a lot more than just a library for Ruby or for Rails. It is a fantastic implementation of REST. It's a great standard, which is catching on, and I hope to see it catch on faster, and I do what I can to help it. This is just one of the ways it can be used.
So is that in the public domain, the JavaScript thing?
Yeah, we released it on Monday, 2 Mondays ago. So does anybody have any questions about ActiveResource?
When you're taking your objects on the server and just passing them over the wire, do you find that sometimes you want to restrict some of the fields that get passed automatically? Do you want to control that to some degree?
Right. So if you're in control of the server and you want to restrict it, I mean, that's up to your Rails code. I mean, you can pass arguments to 2XML that like specify only these fields to be showed, except these to be showed. If you want to, like, there are more powerful things you can do than just modify the 2XML method. You know, you can, as long as you understand the XML format that ActiveResource uses, which is really simple, you can easily just write an actual RXML view yourself for Rails, which I've done. And so, for example, if you want to just not return attributes that are on the database itself, but like, you know, calculated attributes, sums, or whatever, that you just want any client app to treat as an attribute, then that's no problem either. So all you need to do is return XML somehow in this format, and it doesn't care about what your actual database is set up as. The client won't care about your service database format.
Just make them private in the model itself.
Exactly.
I played with this a little bit when it was still in Edge, and like I said, but you can include posts in your example. Users have posts, and say we had a separate controller just to call posts to see all the posts. You could restrict certain fields. In this version that I was using, if you then looked at a user object and subsequently got the post to that, those fields were not restricted; they came through. Do you know if that's been fixed?
I can't. I guess I don't. I can't really comment on that.
All right.
But I would recommend, and this is also recommended by the Rails team, like if your needs for the XML that you want to show become sophisticated like that, you might want to just like make your own basic RXML view, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay, great.
For relatively basic overrides, you can override to XML. You can ask it to avoid including certain things, and then you can include other methods that aren't actually attributes,
Okay.
that are just stored locally as attributes.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Are you going to go over object relationships with each other?
Okay, that's a good question. So, let me make sure I'm running. So in this case, user has many posts. This particular user has 2. So what active record does? So in this case, because I've defined, let me get rid of the transparency here. Because I have defined a post model as well that inherits from ActiveResource base, so it knows that there is a post class, and when it finds an object in the XML, like, and the format for that is, you know, the same as you might expect. Let's see, I've lost myself. So when it sees this pattern of posts and then posts inside, it'll actually go and instantiate objects that are equal to the object that contains them, or equal in power to the object that contains them. So another ActiveResource object. If you don't have a post model in your own local app, in your client app, it'll make its own anonymous class. I think it's, in this case, if I didn't have the post model, it would be like user:post would be the name of the class it instantiates. So it'll make up a class for you if it needs to. But each of the each of these is its own full ActiveResource object, and you can update it and save it the same as you would its parent.
Is that using nested resources?
Yeah. This is not. However, you in ActiveResource proper. So right, if I were to say this isn't implemented, but it would not be out of the question if you had an app which like scoped in the routes the posts by user. The way that ActiveResource handles that is it looks a lot like just typical routing code. So you would do that. So the prefix for a post, it requires a user ID. So then in the terminal, you would actually supply the user ID as part of find, like so. Does that make sense? Okay.
So what's not working? What's still work in progress?
Let's see. Well, there's no, like for example, I can't, so you can do find all, but you can't do conditions. There's no like standard treatment for passing conditions remotely. This is actually something that we were, so I was trying to implement something like this for in our JavaScript implementation, and it's a really difficult problem. Like on whether you want to send SQL fragments over the wire, or whether you want to have your own like domain-specific language for it, or just how you want to treat it so it's not a security hole. But that's one example of things that aren't working. The basic CRUD operations, despite what my setup here might convince you of, are working.
Do they have other serialization formats in mind aside from XML, like JSON, YAML?
I haven't heard any talk about it, but it wouldn't surprise me. When we posted about our JavaScript library, Jester, a lot of people asked about JSON and other formats like that. So yeah.
Like 2JSON exists in Rails, just like 2XML.
Sure, but
that's
on
not
the
what
client side-
ActiveResource is.
Yeah.
ActiveResource is explicitly XML.
That's what I was asking. So
Yeah.
the client-side ActiveResource code right now, when it receives a serial XML, it doesn't yet have a ability to detect if it's JSON. Or
Right.
YAML.
Right.
Okay.
How many HTTP requests occur when you load a user with the associations here? Because you haven't done anything with include, but the posts are getting included.
That's actually not true. I have done something with include. In the here.
Oh, okay. So the XML.
So
the
yeah,
XML
exactly. The
Well, I
posts
meant
are
in
in.
ActiveResource.
I'm sorry.
I meant the include in ActiveResource.
In active.
So when you're making the find call here,
Mhm.
you're not specifying what children.
Right. It
So that's
assumes
what-
based on the XML returned that you don't have to give it any information to, and it doesn't. It won't listen to any information you give it about includes. So to answer your question, only one request is made at a time. Any more questions? Well, great. Thank you for having me, guys.
Thanks, Eric.